All right, notice the hoodie. Yes, in Florida, it's that cold right now. Even though it's fine in my office right now, out in the gym, it's not terribly warm. So, other thing about Florida, as many people know, where I'm at in Florida, Palm Beach Gardens, Jupiter, etc. This is very reasonable to suggest is the golf capital of the world. What I have behind me, the name of this individual will remain nameless, but it's one of the best golfers on earth, and I'm always thankful to be a part of these things because I think incidental to all of this, one of the things that's cool to work with anybody is if you positively affect them individually, you positively affect their world. Think of if somebody does something nice for you and you have a good day, you bring that good day to everybody else. And then when you think about professional athletes, just one game is just the people in the stadium, forget about people watching at home, is 12, 15, 18,000 people that are diverting their life to enjoy what they're doing. And if you can bring a player or anyone involved in the team's operations to do something a little bit more positive, it's fun. And it really embodies one of the things that I wish I had understood a long time ago was the goal is to really be a part of something that's bigger than just yourself. So that's very fun here to know that this golfer that brings enjoyment to this many people by just watching them play is good. And obviously, if they can play better, then you're a part of something very, very unique. So let's talk. I had gotten the initial message just that there was back pain. It was in the middle of the week, so I was still up in Philly, and wound up seeing this individual on a Sunday. So all I had was back pain, and usually with a long history of being a professional athlete, there's going to be other things that matter. So whenever I can prep a little bit, you'll notice up here where we're at 12, which would be now for December 11, 10, 9. I actually didn't even write the 8. And we try to build like a timeline, and that's the first part of the subjective. The first part of the conversation is, hey, let's just fill in where we're at over the last little while, and we just see what does the story tell us. Are there any clues? Obviously, you get a chance to let the individual communicate. You get a chance to let them feel comfortable, and also let them know that you know what you're doing, and you're not a machine, you're not a robot. So we start with all I knew was low back pain, and I like using the faces. We try to use as little anatomy as possible. We try to use as little good and bad, those actual words, as possible. Okay, so all I knew was lower back pain, sad face. So here, as we began to discuss, history of left and right hip issues that are always related to training. And I said, what type of training? Well, he's like, Olympic lifting. I'm like, oh, wow, man, he's a big time golfer who's into handling barbells. So in this case, it stands to question if these are the best options for this individual, but at least they're not doing make-believe mobility warm-ups and calling it training. That's absolute nonsense. Really, really crazy. But we'll stay away as much as possible. Remember, a zebra doesn't change the stripes, but we'll stay as far away from those golf political opinions. History of left hip. So a lot of times I'll ask, like, hey, what's going to make you happy? What can I do for you? What if you leave here? Obviously, one of my older brothers and mentors, Greg Rose, will always ask, you're walking on the beach and you find a genie in a bottle, and there's 3 wishes. What's the most important wish? What's the other 2 wishes that the genie can do for you? And this golfer said, improve left hip internal rotation. So as you know, when we do these case studies, because I'm like sitting in a certain way, and I'm looking at the patient maybe sitting where I'm at right now, and I'm just writing things. So earlier in the week, we had this injury from back squatting, where, pain central, probably below the belt, even though, I let the, and as we all should, person can explain their pain or their symptoms however they want. They're not right or wrong. Whatever they say is whatever they want. In fact, they're never wrong. They're what they say is correct, and then it's our job to translate that. So if we go through this timeline, I said relatively Wednesday because we didn't know it happened in the middle of the week. Going all the way back through this period, no problems, feeling pretty good. But going back to the late summer, he had this issue again and had imaged L5S1, the same left-sided problem that he was talking about. He had it imaged. It did show a disc. I think totally on the same page that disc is irrelevant. He did suggest that there was pain that went below the knee. Very interesting. Also, please do allow that to cast aspersions on your old school McKenzie model that would suggest that pain below the knee is often irreducible. And that's obviously absurd because that older model, I don't believe it's the current model of McKenzie that the disc is doing this, is neither contemporary or accurate because there's a lot of different constructs other than discogenic sources that can cause pain below the knee. But then it cleared up. Went through the fall, no problems, and then ran into this issue. But historically, he has had left and right hip. In his mind, those are the injuries, and they kind of cause pain around the pelvis or the SI, whatever we're going to call it. And additionally, which started to, kind of push us towards, okay, this is a fitness issue, because the day before, he said that they were working on back extension. And I don't know that back extension is a good or bad exercise. I think there's an execution issue for individuals that are somewhat extension intolerant and how they integrate moving in their lumbar spine without moving as much in their hips. It's not an exercise that I typically use. I certainly respect it. I think it can be done in an ideal fashion. I don't see that nearly as often. So now, what I said, tell me more about this squatting, and it happened on the last set. So that's where we put fatigue. And then he talked about the back extensions. So I'm like, well, if maybe we just look at, understand not so much about golf here, because when you're in pain, I care about you much more at a human perspective rather than a golf perspective. And sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, which is my own bias, a lot of the things that would lead to creating a solution to threat perception and pain is also the same things that may be challenging the consistency or top level performance of the golf swing. Because I think unlike other sports, the brilliance and what I love about being involved in performance of golf is that the precision of one swing is so close to this ideal human function of mobility and stability that they often do match up, but they don't always. And I must protect myself from my own bias that it doesn't always have to be the same thing. When there's pain, I'm not even worried about golf because, again, I'll also take the assumption that I'm never going to see this individual again, and they came to see me because their back hurt. They did not come to see me to engage in this different process of improving golf performance. They can be one and the same. They may not always be. Okay, so we're looking back, and then we looked at, well, maybe this is really a squatting problem because you probably did these extensions by cranking in your lower back and throwing your neck into the next county. And maybe you irritated, something, created a little threat, even though not every single person will respond that way. And then you took that into an inefficient execution of a good exercise in the back squat. And mind you, we have not done any physical exam yet. So I don't even know that this individual has the competency to have a favorable risk reward in executing a back squat or these Olympic lifting patterns, okay? But I think we're hedging, and we should. It's okay to hedge, but because if you just do everything the right way, you'll protect yourself from your own bias. What do we find? This is this definitely did, in my opinion, go down the road of lots of things that could be reviewed. And the most important thing to really put into place is that you can still be one of the best physical performers on earth and still have a lot of these things going on. But with this individual, even though he is very, very highly ranked and has won several times on tour, then this dude has pain from training. Rule number 1, don't get hurt training. Rule number 2, don't get hurt playing. Rule number 3, increase performance. We are violating rule number 1 here. He's had 3 injuries, this being one of them, that all happened in training. He doesn't get hurt on the course, and I do hold the opinion that if this wasn't a great elite athlete, they probably would be hurt on the course and wouldn't be that good. And then maybe because they wouldn't be that good, they wouldn't get hurt because they wouldn't be able to figure out how to circumvent some of the neurological signs, symptoms that the body delivers. Very often, you can make a very unscientific statement and say, like, your brain is not allowing you to do something, so it doesn't hurt. And that's what Yanda called a coper. Or a non-coper is somebody that can't figure out how to compensate and still execute the skill, but still have pain. So there's a lot to learn here, which is really why I was excited to do this. And then, of course, I was also excited, man, I would really like to see what exactly you do on 3D or some kind of even just slow motion 2D, just to understand, because it's not to blow smoke. This is an elite athlete, but doesn't always have what we think are the elite requisites. Because at the end of the day, it is realistic that all of these things, without the presence of pain, may be irrelevant. We will never, ever go down that rabbit hole. And that is a significant claim. It is a significant concern that people make when we take this keen movement evaluation, that you're addressing things. You're never fixing anything. You're addressing things that don't matter. Well, that's why we do need, in an elite athlete, to look at both the baseline human level competency, but also what do they do in their technical skill. And then the question is, are you satisfied with your technical skill? Or do you want to just hit it further, or do you need to be more consistent or even change your technique? Is this a fitness component issue, or is this a motor skill acquisition at the highest level? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and it is not acceptable to not ask those questions. I think it's acceptable to kind of push them down the ladder in terms of a priority, but those questions have to be answered. They absolutely have to be answered. And oftentimes in bogus commercial therapy, where someone goes for their pain and they just take themselves away from that terminal skill, they feel better. They did absolutely nothing to remediate their symptoms other than rest. And then they go back to whatever they were doing, even if they did have some kind of ramp back into their training load. And then a problem happens again because nobody knew that their left hip had 0 internal rotation, which is ironically probably I'm eyeballing it in this case, but that's pretty gosh darn close as to an elite golfer, except it wasn't really 0, which we'll get into. Okay, so let's get into the color codes here. Only the things that you see as purple are from day 2. I left this up almost a week just because I could, and I wanted to make sure we were able to record before I erased it. So everything that you see in red is primarily from the first session. Only the purple, which you got here, and here is from the second session. Okay, forward bending. He could not touch his toes. Okay, well, and it also caused pain. So we do not use the DP, FP. I put that in my head, but when I whiteboard it, I don't want my patient or client to have a window into those words because they may have significant meaning. Everybody feels okay with little emoji faces. Whether they're happy or not happy. Okay, so now we move forward and we find that passive straight leg raise, still stiff, but nothing going down the leg just yet. All right, core activation with active straight leg raise found that this was very, very good. Okay, well, we're getting into something, and now we can start to, maybe what's the term in poker, where you then, kind of double hedge your bet, because we did extensions that probably fatigued you. You probably did back squats with this horrible extension pattern, which probably would be part of why someone might hide from some rotational issues. And I'm thinking maybe he's retroverted. But man, you don't see elite golfers that are retroverted. You're going to see team sport athletes. All right, so now we get into, well, if we then use core activation and all of a sudden your hips move more in this sagittal plane, well, I think it stands to reason that the rotation of the pelvis allowed the femur to sit more centrally. You centrated the hip via the core, and then all of a sudden you have a better straight leg raise. So his posterior chain was still limited, but not as limited. So this is a very important pattern because it has pain, it has a stability issue, and it probably still has a mobility issue. So that is going to be a significant focus in terms of how we start to remediate this. But we got to look at everything else. You got to look at all the patterns. You're never allowed to look at just one pattern, whether you're using the SFMA or the FMS, if for the only reason that you don't know where the lowest hanging fruit is, where is the highest level of priority. Extension, also not good. Left-sided pain with the full pattern. Looking at one leg did not change anything. Active to passive. He got happy with passive, but it was upset in active. So again, maybe we're looking at an active compression. So now if he's doing the extension, and even though he's being coached to use his hands to do that cobra stretch with the hips out of the equation, he still had pain. But passively, he was able to do it, and the right side had no pain. We saw that with hip extension. The right side had no pain, but the left side did. So again, we're seeing some things that start to add up. Rotation, this one was a little bit tricky because part of what makes this individual an elite golfer was that even though we don't know this yet, his both hips internal rotation are much lower than what you would see on tour. His spinal rotation is almost like an owl. Like he could just roll around. So he makes up for a lot of that rotation that isn't happening at the hip. He makes up for it in the spine. So the standing position probably did get to that 105, even more. But you're not quite sure, are you seeing 45 to 50 at the pelvis? You kind of eyeball it. So we looked at it anyway, and if you're on top of how you do the SFMA with experience, you just memorize all the different positions so you don't have to keep changing all the positions around. So when you look at, from a flexion standpoint with pain, when you look at the slump test, which would be your local biomechanical assessment, you're also going to look at seated rotation. You don't do them all in one shot because then you're just moving into all different positions. So in my mind, we're going to look at rotation anyway. We weren't quite sure if the left was less than the right. So whenever you're not sure, you're going to look anyway. All right. Standing on one leg, no problem. Deep squat definitely had ankle limitation on both sides, and the left ankle was more limited than the right, using a standing, not half kneeling, the standing closed chain dorsiflexion test. Medial rotation, the right side. I'm hesitant to say that that's the biggest problem here, but it was something. The right side medial rotation extension was definitely limited, but if everybody was that limited, I don't think it'd be much of a problem. External rotation and the cervical spine were both fine. So from a painful and non-painful standpoint, we would probably find that because rotation was definitely asymmetrical, even though they were both pretty good, that would be our most non-painful pattern. But I can't let this individual walk out of my office without some kind of change of pain, because we already know from a technical level, primarily rotating, no pain, but just doing basic body weight movements, some of them with very, very low vertical load, still having pain. So we're going to say that flexion and extension were our primary issues. But what I said was interesting before is that when we did measure rotation of the hip, the right side was maybe 20, 30, nothing that would be remotely close to one of the best golfers on earth, and the left side, which he already knew was his issue, and that's always where this pain is, was basically 0. If it wasn't 0, it was 5. So, I remember in Westchester University with Dr. Joe Godek and his wife Sandy Godek, we had to look at range of motion, eyeballing it, and be within 5 degrees of the instructor's measurement. So if it wasn't 0, it was 5. So, what did we do? Well, when we started to look at where we went with all of this, one of the most interesting links is that if we created pressurization of the trunk in the lowest position, 3.5 month position, all of a sudden the hip rotated much more. So now the lesson that's really supersedes this particular individual eval is that you will have a significant loss of performance of hip internal rotation when the pelvis is anteriorly rotated, when the trunk is extended. I'm like, that's your problem. That's the issue here. So I don't think mobilizing the hip right now is going to be our best option. That might be from golf performance, but I don't think that's gonna be your the link into changing your pain. I think we've got to get better at neutralizing and centrating the spine, and secondly the pelvis, so that the femoral head sits in this area. So it really confirms that the hip is wagging the tail here, because when I asked, I said, like, when you swing, like, what are some of the things that you don't do well sometimes, or are you just doing it awesome all the time? And of course, when you see people that can't squat body weight, because whatever the reason is, and you see people that can't touch their toes, not all, but a lot of them will have a propensity to have early extension, meaning they're going to come out of their swing a little bit early, and obviously that affects the path of the club and thusly the club head face. So what did we do? Well, we definitely treated a little bit. We used some needles, and pain was not abolished, so we left him with L5-S1 and 3.5 month breathing package. These were all things that were pain-free, and they created significant change in flexion, they created change in rotation, and all of our movements improved in standing just by creating intra-abdominal pressurization, breathing. We always start with the exhalation position. That was the biggest thing that I think we brought to the table with that breathing seminar that we did during the lockdown at Todd Georgie's gym in Mamaroneck, New York Strong, where by you are descending the rib cage, and that's where you start. So that's the only time there's a heavy exhalation. It's big in, easy out, big in, easy out. So all we did was leave him with the pressurization piece, L5-S1. When we looked at some of the other exercises that we tried after we treated the SI, LDOA, general SI. We looked at hamstring, we looked at active straight leg raise and core activation. We were just delivering what the evaluation told us, which is always just the concept of whatever we're doing. The evaluation is just, you're just asking, the key movement evaluation is basically asking the body questions, and it tells you what it's asking if it's not muddled and muddied with a lot of pain. So we were able to treat the pain first, basically clear out the rubble, and maybe see something a little bit more authentic. We also, like, when I scribble and I draw out what I want to accomplish, we knew that we had to get at a number of different things. So, but the big ones that we went after was intra-abdominal pressure. Let's just get breathing. Let's be in this safe position. The floor flattens you out. The floor is your coach. Let's shush. Use a straw. Cough. All of these things that descend the rib cage, and you should be able to feel your abs. But that's all we got, and the L5-S1. He felt better in a couple days, not 100%. Then we gave him hamstring mobilization and pressurization. Now, because he was so hot, we did not test from a neurodynamic standpoint. We did that here on day 2. which was roughly 1 week later. And we definitely found a positive finding where now I'm not sure the hamstring was the lowest hanging fruit, because when there's tension in the nerve, you can't tell if it's only the nerve, but you also can't tell if it's the nerve and the myofascial component of the 3 hamstrings. So you treat the nerve first, but as we know, mobilizing a nerve is very, very different than mobilizing a hamstring. Any suggestion that all of it is the same and the body only communicates with tension and force, that's soggy. That's real soggy, because if you have a neural tension component and you treat that nerve the same way you would treat muscle or fascia, that nerve is going to get real angry. So you would clear the nerve with a neurodynamic standpoint first, and then you go to those tried and true myofascial components. Nerves are like a rubber band, and they just want to get like this, in and out, and you're not going to be doing this all day as if it was a muscle fascia, which I'm not sure you can tell the difference between the two. I think you can with the nerve. That's my opinion. The myofascial component is that same rubber band, but you hold it. And the stronger you hold it, it starts to relax in the middle. A nerve is get in and get out, get in and get out, okay? So we went with the hamstring and the SI, and he became very, very happy. But when we came in and we said, yeah, it's like I played a little bit, so within a week, so that does tell us that whatever we started with, probably not a significant demand, certainly not a neural compression, nothing at the disc, nothing at the nerve root, nothing. He had pain in that pattern, but it's not, it was probably much more to do with this extension piece. And that extension piece would make a lot of sense for somebody that can't bend forward. And they wind up arching to create this balance of their center of mass within their base of support. Okay, so we also looked at the calf stretch, which was something that we saw before. We looked at lateralization after we talked a little bit more about the golf swing, which we'll kind of leave out here. It's not as crucial to this, other than it appears clear that for this human being, this individual, the amount of extension limits the front side hip, which then limits the amount of side bend that we would look for on the way to impact. Side bend is at least 35 degrees of most tour players, and we were not there. So we simply would use a very functional approach, and I'm like, shush it out. And I don't expect you to be having this feed forward mechanism of intra-abdominal pressure while you swing a golf club 120 plus miles per hour. But then all of a sudden, he's like, that feels better. That feels like what it should feel like. It doesn't feel jammed up. I'm like, yeah, because by arching with the longer clubs, you can rotate around your front hip at least more than 0. I would say it got up to 35 or 40, which then allows you to side bend. So there was clearly a link to what I think was causing his pain. But that's the thing. Great athletes will figure out a way to put the ball where it belongs, whether it's in the basket, whether it's on the green, whether it's in the strike zone or not, despite their physical limitations. And the suggestion is not that you're going to make them a better athlete or a more successful performer, other than maybe they will be a more often performer, meaning these pain points, which typically don't get easier. Sometimes you're out for a little bit, and then it's longer and longer, particularly as age comes through. So what we're really looking at here is, I don't know the chicken or the egg. Okay, I'm going to suggest that with more thought, that at some point this individual was not strong enough. He's not weak. He's just not strong enough to maintain that neutral spine and neutral pelvis. So to create stabilization, not using the inner unit, not using his rectus abdominis and obliques, et cetera, and letting the glutes be there for impact, he chose to extend his lower back crush his spine together and create stability that way. Stability is never good or bad. It may have a desirable or undesirable impact, but you can create stability from inefficient ways. And that's the difference in this case where you crush your spine through extension. This is a type of form closure where you just crush things together to create stability rather than keep them apart and allow whatever natural micro motion exists by using force closure. Okay, so what we would do is this is clearly a golf problem, but when there's pain involved, it does appear that the exercises, that the active exercise approach to create overall stability from what we saw in this evaluation would probably have carryover, but it still has to carry over enough into the standing position. So that's is a very, very interesting piece where if you can use the shorter clubs, which simply physics would say are not as demanding. They're shorter, you're closer to the ball. This thing doesn't have the same equation resultant from via torque because it's not as long. Then as soon as the club gets longer, you have to deliver something differently than the shorter clubs. So now as you come in, if it's too much and your body's like, man, I'm not strong enough to do this, even though you probably are, then all of a sudden you crush your spine, you lose hip internal rotation, and try to side bend when your lumbar spine is extended. So very, very interesting piece here. Lots of things to consider. I'm not sure squatting is a great idea when we have two different hips. But do we have two different hips because of the extension and then squat's a problem? Yes. But what if we squatted with an ideal spine? And I'm not even worried about that right now because I'm not sure there's a reason to squat. There's a lot of lower body training that we can do while we work on other things because we should never be married to any one exercise. I think we should be able to squat, and that's why we're going to get after the calf piece. Everything was opening joint symptoms, so we're going to get after that. I need him to dunk it. I'd love for him to dunk it with his toes straight, shoulder width. I'd love for his shoulders to be 90-90 and hold the dowel over his head and everything stay upright. And the line that you see in the tibia would be the same line that you see in his trunk while that stick remains over his base of support. I would like to see that. I don't care if it's ever heavier than a dowel because we can goblet squat, we can double kettlebell front squat, we can double kettlebell walk out of front squats and get some really, really good fitness because man, spines feel real awful immediately when you try to extend when you have a load in the front of you. When you have a load in your back, it kind of feels okay to extend, and that's the problem with squatting. It's not because squatting is a bad exercise. And then people that may defend the squat in these cases, man, you're not squatting anything. Like you got. Remember, this is still golf, man. Even if you're a skinny golfer, and the amount of force that you can create at 160 pounds, you telling me you got 320 on your back? I don't think so. No. And I didn't even get there with this individual, but there's no way you're squatting real weight. Because if you're squatting real weight, you're throwing your head into the next counter, you're arching your back, and you're getting pinned probably when you get to halfway. So I'm not even into that. There's not a discussion because you don't need to do it. I've said this on camera before, and I've said it actually in front of Mike Boyle, another one of my older brothers. It's like, I don't think there's a problem with squatting. I think there's a problem because you let people look up and you let them arch their back. And if you're a big, savage, strong dude, like people that I used to train with, and you hear that old man going, arch, 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 yo, it's because you're stupid strong and you have trained that position to tolerate that, and you have some of the greatest mental toughness on earth. And they're super fit for powerlifting. Man, this isn't powerlifting. And I think that's what we found here. So where would we go instead? I'd say to start, if it's pain-free, we would just do some kind of anterior loaded reverse lunge. And I am a significant believer of everything else that Mike Boyle says, where just use goblet squat until it becomes an upper body drill, or you run out of dumbbells. And if you got kettlebells, you just use both of them. And then you never even need to get past this. So there's a lot of pieces that we would look at, but we need to create a normalization of a centrated lumbar spine, a pressurized abdominal cavity. That's the strong core that this gentleman needs. automatically the hip showed what it could really do. And then we need to take that to the more vertical patterns, and we need to take that into vertical patterns of rotation, which is also why squatting with a bar on your back probably isn't the answer, because while you do require a degree of rotation in the hips, remember, if you're arching, then you're not going to be able to express your internal rotation, and no wonder you have a problem on your left side. It's just being clobbered. But let's say you can be neutral, then maybe we have a reason to use this. I still think there's much better options for an elite athlete. So keep all that in mind. I think that we got into more core values of what you would be looking for in an evaluation, but also to appreciate that the best athletes on earth will figure out a way to put the ball, or they'll figure out a way to execute the skill at an elite level. But when you're practicing under these deleterious conditions, you got to be careful too if you try and change it. I think in this case, we need to pull away from some of the provocative things like the squats. Let's backfill ankles. Let's backfill lumbar stabilization. Maybe then we get up into the right shoulder and let that be the last thing. And then we train intelligently for an explosive rotary athlete, where we do look at gaps between strength execution and power execution. I don't think we're at a stage to do that just yet. We're just laying the framework of putting the core values into this young man's culture and see what we can get. But we will not be doing silly, we're calling it training, and you're doing non-stimulative mobility workouts. All you're doing is moving with a bunch of gadgets. So I'm thrilled that this young man already has the seeds of the culture that, no, I do need to lift heavy. And I'm like, heavy means a lot of different things, but great form, and form that carries over to your swing, which is less extension through the spine and less retroversion through the pelvis. So that you can side bend, because I needed the side bend from the golf coach. As soon as the golf coach said, we need more side bend, I'm like, got it, okay? It's gonna be a golf problem. It's gonna be the golf pros carrying the football across the goal line. But I think what we can do in the gym is make it a little bit easier for that to happen, because it's the hip that is leading to this, or it's this that leads to the hip, and both of that situation is why they can't get into the side bend. That's physics. That's not up for discussion. That's exactly what's happening. What we do about it is very much up for discussion, because again, one option, this is already one of the best golfers on earth. He is allowed to continue in the way he's doing. How about we just stop back squatting, because that's where the damn problems happen. So if you're married to a certain exercise, be married to the movement. Years and years ago, Gray Cook would say, like, practice the squat, train the deadlift. So whether that's the case here or not, irrelevant. My point is that there's a big difference between squat, the exercise, and squat, the movement evaluation, and including there's a big difference between squat in the movement evaluation for pain, there is for general fitness, and golf performance. Those are three completely different squat movement evaluations. The one for golf and general fitness is similar, but they're still not quite the same for what you're looking for. And then how do you interpret that information? Nothing is bad, nothing is good, everything is a blinking yellow light, which then gives you an opportunity to understand the risk reward for the next step in the training, in the rehab, in the performance process. So this was exciting, because you got to see a lot of things that I think are very, very useful to consider and very, very useful to think about. So I imagine this is part 3 by now. I obviously recorded it all straight away. This was very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward to helping this young man make a whole lot of money and make a lot of people happy enjoying his game of golf. If you happen to, whether it's golf or any other sports, or even if you're just playing around on your phone watching this on Instagram, if you do happen to come across this video while you are in the Crichton section of Mobile, Alabama, I want you to look up in that tree. I want you to see if you can find me, that leprechaun. Say yeah.